Bigger, better, bolder. The cold, hard truth is taking talk to the next level. Right here on Bobo 89.1 FM, Cayman's Community Radio.
We are still spilling the tea.
And committed to being part of the change that Cayman so desperately needs. Join Sandy Hill weekdays from 7:30 a.m. for Premier Access, Cayman Voices, Truthful Thursdays, and much more. Cayman's #1 talk show is now bigger, better, bolder, and more than talk. Getting results with hot topics, consumer reports, court exposés, and more.
I've come to set the record straight. I've come to shine the light on you. Let me introduce myself. I am the cold, hard truth.
Now, from the CMR studio in Grand Cayman.
Live, direct.
It's the cold, hard truth. Now. Join the conversation on 345-936-2626.
That number again is
345-936-2626.
Good morning, Cayman. Rise and shine. Wakey. It's time to get up. How are you guys doing this beautiful? Is it Wednesday? I think it's Wednesday. Wednesday morning, yes. All right, folks, we've got lots of ground to cover in class today. I want to do a big shout out to our Instagram listeners. I see you guys now logging on. We also, of course, have people on Facebook, YouTube, and this is the week that we officially have launched CMR TV. It's a slow launch, but it means that we are focusing on really, really important content for you guys and making sure all the courts on the website are figured out, and then it will launch there a little bit later on this week. If all goes well, lots of technical teams in the background making this happen. So let me first send out our links to everyone to make sure that those of you who follow the WhatsApp channel, you get those directly into your mailbox every single day. So if you don't, for some reason, follow the channel, just a little reminder that is the best way to get all of your alerts. You get everything there, weather and so on. So traffic alerts, weather alerts, all the latest news alerts as well. And quite frankly, CMR is the only local news channel that we go beyond our borders when it comes to giving you content, because we're no longer the island that time forgot. I can assure you of that. And so we have to be cognizant and aware of exactly what is happening around us, both regionally and internationally. And there's always quite a bit that is going on. So I want to go ahead and just reiterate, we do regional news. We obviously, do international news tidbits as well. So lots happening around the world. I want to thank the people. There are a lot of people behind the scenes who make this happen. We have a new collaboration that is coming on board this month. So July is really, really a big month with a Caribbean news source where we're going to be providing them some news, and they're going to be likewise providing us with news as well. So you'll see some Carib news coming up here shortly, CMC Caribbean. And that's a collaboration that we're very, very pleased to be moving forward. So, of course, that's the Caribbean Media Corporation out of Barbados. Yes. So those of you, we have a very diverse community here, and even Caymanians travel and they want to know what's happening elsewhere in the world. So the phone lines are going to be closed for the first segment of the show because we're going to have a what do we call it? Sip and learn segment here today. That means that we're going to be doing a deep dive with Miss Marla Dukharan. She is in the back studio waiting for us. And of course, Melanie is already here saying, welcome, Miss Marla, watching on YouTube. So we do have segments like this where sometimes you just got to sit back and listen. I know we love to talk, myself included, but you really, really learn when you listen. And when the experts are in the house, like an expert corner, you've got to really just take your time and understand the implications of what it is that they're saying and, make it soak in before you start to even formulate your own ideas. It's easy to think that we have all the ideas in our head and we know what's going on, but sometimes you just got to sit back and listen for a little bit. So I want to welcome all of you and invite you this morning to sit back and have a learning segment. And then towards the end, we can open up the phone lines a little bit if you have any questions for Miss Marla. So yes, good morning to all the usual suspects. We've got Miss Vernita from the UK. We've got Abby, Jim joining us right here, probably on the farm this morning, although it looks like it's going to rain. Demara is joining us from Queens, New York. Irvlin from the Savannah at Newlands area. We've got Olivia. Thank you so much. He says he's on time and ready to hear the sus. It's a different kind of sus this morning, but still, nonetheless, I think, Jim, you're going to find it so fascinating. Wee and Jasara, Melanie Carmichael, Marshall joining us from North Carolina. Miss Mitzi is right here with us. Miss Marva, good morning. She says, good morning, Lady Sandra. Good morning to you, my dear. Andrew Campbell in the house. He says, blessed Wednesday morning to you and the family. Thank you so much. And Diamond Princess and lots more are tuned in. So let's go ahead and welcome Miss Marla Dukharan. I can now officially say that she's not a stranger to the program. She has been here before, and we're hoping that, of course, she will continue to be a regular feature. Ms. Marla brings a wealth of experience when it comes to not just the Caribbean economy, but the world. And she pays attention to what is happening all over the world. And she has an amazing website, which we'll find out a little bit about. But her prominence in the Caribbean is well known as an economist and advisor, and she has expertise in economic analysis, policy recommendations, and strategic guidance focused specifically on this region, but really beyond as well. So, we often talk about things like fiscal and economic resilience, sustainable development, gender equality, poverty, income equality, and the unique vulnerabilities that are faced by small island developing states. And so this latter one, the small island developing states, and what makes us especially vulnerable is something that we are going to be having a look at. But if you don't follow her, you should follow her, because she has an amazing monthly Caribbean economic report that is widely read, and it's a critical resource for monitoring economic risk, vulnerabilities, and opportunities across the region. Many of you will know that she's also a keynote speaker and thought leader, which means that she's very sought after at the international level, all sorts of conferences, industry events, and academic forums. And she regularly shares her insight on regional and global developments that impact our region and beyond. So let us put our virtual hands together and welcome Miss Marla to the discussion this morning. Good morning, Miss Marla Dukharan. How are you?
Good morning, Miss Sandra. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the warm welcome. And I'm doing very well. Thank you. How are you doing?
Yes, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Very, very excited, obviously, to have you here with us because, like I just said to our listeners, this is an opportunity for all of us, including myself, to really learn. It is so critical and important that we take opportunities to just elevate, our thought process, elevate what we think we know about the world. Because despite us thinking that we know so much in a time when information is readily accessible, the truth of the matter is a lot of people are not reading. They're not paying attention too much to global or regional events. And instead, they just sit down and, whatever their grandma told them 20 years ago, they think is still somehow relevant today. But it's a different world.
This is so true. That's true. People are not reading. And I love to write, so it's heartbreaking. And of course, writing these reports like the one that we'll discuss,
Yes.
maybe 5 people will read it, I think.
Yeah.
So it's important to have these kinds of discussions so that the content in there and the ideas in there, and more importantly, the solutions are available to everybody in a different format, because nobody is going to sit down and read I don't know how many pages it is even. It's just a lot. It's
10
long.
pages.
10, okay.
Yes. And I must tell you that it is an interesting read, but I do suspect that some people it will kind of, what do we say, go over their heads a little bit. And that is why you're here today, to break it down so that hopefully anyone can understand the salient points that are contained in this report. Now, you do these reports. Let's talk about you for just a minute, because you do these reports all the time. And it takes a lot of research and effort. It's not easy putting together 10 pages of proper analysis on the climate, tax, and social justice foundations in financing SIDS Transilience Towards Freedom. So this is a big one, and there's a lot of people who might get past the first quote and then they're lost. But I do know that you actually spend a lot of time, you and your team, writing and researching and putting these together. So let's invite people, folks, if you haven't already, to check out Miss Marla's website. It's marladukharan.com. And you can actually have a look there and subscribe to her monthly reports. She does send out these emails, and you can get a bit of information there. She's got a beautifully designed website, by the way. Congratulations to your team for that as well. But it's really, really important that we support entrepreneurs in this space, because, of course, Miss Marla, just like the rest of us, has, responsibilities. And so her business model is one where obviously, she does guest speaking, she does quite a bit of stuff, and we want to ensure, I think I've got the wrong one pulled up here, but we just want to ensure that you guys are aware of her website, aware that you can follow her. And I don't think you charge for these reports. Like you do a lot of work at zero cost so that people can actually have access to this information. Let me just hold on one second here. Now I'm going to just pull it up properly. But yes, this is amazing because people can have access to the site and learn so much from Miss Marla. So here's her beautiful website. There we go. Look at that. Looks absolutely gorgeous. So go on the website
and those
subscribe.
Photos. Thank you. But those photos, I just wanted to mention. I hate photo shoots. I hate them.
Oh gosh.
I hate taking photos. And your own in Cayman, your own Miss Ilian Powery, former Miss Cayman. Before she was Miss Cayman, did this
Uh-huh.
photo shoot for me in Cayman.
Ah,
I think it was at the Kimpton, yes, after a conference that I was speaking at. And we just went outside in the yard and took some pictures, and those are
wow.
the pictures that are on my.
Wow, look at that.
So
That's
Cayman has a
beautiful.
stamp in my website via those photos. But
Yes.
yes, no, thank you for outlining all of that, Miss Sandra. And yes, I really appreciate that you've given me this opportunity to discuss the work that I do and this report that I've written, um, so that it can reach a wider audience. And I really appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely. So let's start now to dive into it because it's 10 pages, but it's a pretty deep 10 pages. So let me first ask you, what was your motivation for writing this particular piece?
So in April of this year, well, of course, I'm always thinking about why is the Caribbean where it is and why are we underperforming in general. Now, Cayman is quite different, right? So let's just start with that. So remember that Cayman is a very, very prosperous society relative to many other Caribbean countries, even though many times while we're in a country, we can get overwhelmed with the things that are not going right. And as humans, we focus sometimes on the negatives and the risks. But Cayman is not by any means the average in the Caribbean. We have many countries in the Caribbean that are really underperforming, including my own, Trinidad and Tobago. And so it's always on my mind. Why are we this way, and what's holding us back from achieving true, inclusive, equitable progress for all Caribbean people? And then in April of this year, I had the privilege, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity that I was able to spend a month in the Pacific in Fiji and Vanuatu. And I was able to see how small island states in another part of the world have actually achieved a lot more than we have in the Caribbean. Even if their GDP per capita is lower than ours, they have less poverty. I didn't see homelessness and, poverty the way I have seen in the Caribbean. And it comes from many reasons, and I can discuss that. But that was my motivation, was in writing this, being able to have that lens from the Pacific and this constant, what keeps me up at night, wondering why are we the way we are, and what's holding us back from doing better. And this piece basically came out of my assessment and introspection of what the problem is and where the solutions lie.
Very, very interesting. You talk about the fact that Cayman is not the norm, regionally, perhaps even globally. We have had a success story that in many respects is quite unique. But I think that people have taken that for, granted. We think that that's the norm. So many of us do. And we also, I think at some level, are a little bit disillusioned about how the real world works. I often sit back and listen. I'm no expert here. I'm no world traveler, but I try to get out there a little bit and I listen when I travel. I think the most important thing about traveling is the experience that you get, the things that you see, and how you can learn so much about different people, different cultures, different economies, history, everything. And you have to really immerse yourself. But I am oftentimes very, very shocked at how my own people, and I can afford to say this, are extremely closed-minded. So whether it is the economy, it is the environment, social justice, we have a very limited perspective on how the world operates. And that is interesting. And I think often to myself, that is something that if we're not careful, will be to our detriment. As people say, that's going to be the death of you, because we refuse to educate ourselves beyond our borders. We think, oh, this is it. When I hear, for example, are people saying, why can't our MPs adjust the cost of living? There's more that they can certainly do. I wonder if we don't understand the trickle-down effect of how the cost of living comes from so many different factors. And I would probably say a lot of them are definitely outside of our control. So one of the things that you do in this report, which I find so fascinating, is you kind of take a deep dive into how we, and when I say we now, I'm talking about regionally, but how we even got here. You know, how is it that as a country and as a region, we get to this point? You see this quote here, it says, development consists of the removal of various types of unfreedoms that leave people with little choice and little opportunity of exercising their reasoned agency. The removal of substantial unfreedoms is constitutive of development. This is important because Caymanians are sort of feeling it, but in our core, we're like, oh, it's too much, it's too fast, we can't keep up. And then on the other hand, I'm not so sure that we get exactly what that is, the unfreedoms tied to development. So let's talk about that. That is where you start off your report. So what does that even mean? If you could break it down for our listeners, what does that mean?
So when we think about economic development, socioeconomic development, sustainable socioeconomic development, what does that mean? Some people think, like in Cayman, and it I suppose is a perfect example of how we do not understand what development is. In Cayman, when you all use the word development, you all mean construction.
Yes.
And it's the only country that I've come across where development, which is a word that means economic, social and economic development, where you all liken that to construction. And in Trinidad, I think we have a similar idea, because I know people talk about how Trinidad is so developed in the Caribbean context. It's because our capital has plenty big high-rise buildings, you know. So we kind of think of construction as the evidence of economic development, when in fact, I'm arguing in this paper, and many development economists have argued that is not what development really is. Development is, as Amartya Sen, who is one of the best known development economists, he's basically saying development is freedom. Do you have the freedom to decide what career you're going to pursue, whether it's farming or law or medicine or economics? Do you have the freedom to go and work, or are you forced to stay at home and look after children and elderly parents? Do you have the freedom to eat healthy food at an affordable cost? Do you have the freedom to take public transportation at any hour of the day or night without fear? Or be even walking on the street at any hour of the day or night without fear? So I'm just using these few things as an example to drive the point home that development is freedom, right? And in the Caribbean, when we think about freedom, I'm sure you can attest to this in Cayman, because I don't know any other country in the Caribbean that can't. When we were children, our parents and we as children had a lot more freedom than we had today. I mean, I cannot go for a walk in Trinidad just like that, you know, especially if it's dark, without being very careful about where I'm going, and, you know, making sure that I'm safe by making sure that there are people around and you're in a safe, you know what I mean? Whereas as a child, we never thought about these things. You know, we would go on our bicycles and come back when we come back, and you think the parents have cell phones and they know how to reach, you know? So we have actually regressed in terms of development. If you look at development as freedom, the Caribbean has regressed. And so I'm arguing in this report that we are underperforming, and I'm looking at the reasons why. Now, in the first place, all of us in the Caribbean were colonized, and actually the majority, most people don't know this, but the majority of the Caribbean is still colonized by the number of jurisdictions. So we are politically less free,
Yes.
than we are free politically. So again, unfreedoms meaning less development. We are dependent on the global north. We are in terms of importing our food. You know, 90% on average of what we consume in the Caribbean is imported. And where is it imported from? Mostly from the United States or through the United States and China. And so, again, that's an unfreedom right there. We do not grow what we eat and eat what we grow, largely. We don't. Whereas in the Pacific, I saw people who were completely, food insecurity is not a term in their vocabulary. Because even if my island is very small in the Pacific, a neighboring island that I can see across the water and take my boat to, they have livestock that I don't have. And so even if my tiny island is not self-sufficient or secure in terms of food, as a collective, we are. And in the Caribbean, we are so much more individualistic as countries than we are integrated.
Yes.
And I think that there was a higher level of integration in the Pacific Islands, and therefore codependency on each other to solve their problems, as opposed to dependency on the global north, which is Australia and New Zealand in the Pacific. For us, it's, global north meaning North America and, Europe and the UK. So I'm saying that we have a lot of unfreedoms that we need to address. And these unfreedoms came from the fact that we were colonized and certain systems were set up in a way to make this the case, right? And I'm arguing in the paper that for us to develop, we need to break those systems.
Yes.
And we need to break even mindsets about what is development. I think when you think about development in the Pacific, they're much less materialistic than we are. Everybody wants to have a car, everybody wants to have, iPhone and devices, and whereas that's not necessarily the life that is the healthiest life for us, and it's not necessarily financially sustainable from a Caribbean context. So, but if you had the freedom, you had the freedom to choose. That there are a lot of people in the Caribbean that don't have this choice. Also in the Caribbean, a lot of people are barely getting by, which means they have no freedoms. And when you look at something like the labor force participation rate, the labor force participation rate measures the amount or the proportion of your working age population that is in the workforce. And across the Caribbean, the labor force participation rate has suffered for a long time after COVID. It might now be recovering, but women participate less in the labor force consistently, in some cases 20% less than men. So you might have a male labor force participation rate of say 65%, and it's anywhere around 45-50% for women. Why is that? Because women don't have as many freedoms and choices as they would like to have.
Yes.
I remember, I am a perfect example. When I had my kids and they were very little before preschool, it was so difficult to have a full-time job, and you have to pay somebody to be a full-time carer for your kids. I ended up just leaving my job when I went back to work after maternity leave after I had my son, the second one, and I lasted a few months, and I was an at-home mom for 4 years,
Yes.
be- because it was so difficult to manage a full-time job and two children and a home,
Yes.
So I'm saying all of these things to say we do not have enough freedoms in the Caribbean. We are underdeveloped from that perspective, or through that lens of development as freedom. And we fool ourselves into thinking we're developed developing or close to develop because of the construction that we have that's obvious, big hotels, big buildings, high rises, so on. And we think we're developed, we're actually not. And I'm arguing why, and I'm arguing for the solutions in this report.
Yes. Very good. So redefining how we see and what we think development even means is critical to advancing, our understanding of this particular report that we have before us. The other thing I found very, very interesting when you were talking about women and their freedoms. I mean, one of the things that we know, and this isn't to pull and push any kind of, pro-feminist agenda. I know some Caribbean men, the first time you start talking about the power of women in our communities and our homes and so on, they're like, oh, they kind of freak out a little bit. But, we have to understand that in countries, and this is proven time and time again, where you have women being the leaders in your political leaders, leaders in the homes, in your churches, owning businesses, right? They are the ones, believe it or not, who force development forward for everyone in our communities. So women have a unique ability to have more of a trickle-down impact when they are running corporations, when they're running small businesses, when they're running NPOs and other organizations. And this is just a fact, folks. I'm not, like I said, this isn't any agenda. So when you talk about, women having less freedoms, I think we need to understand the impact of that and where that actually starts. The first place that starts is in a home that is safe and free of violence, and that also offers educational opportunities to women, in particular, to everyone, but definitely to women. So in countries, some countries in the Middle East and other places where women are forced to not go to school, they're seen as second-class citizens. They're told at a certain age, you're 16, now you have to get into an arranged marriage, you have to focus on a family, and you can't contribute in other ways to your community and your society. Those cultures and those, I don't really want to say cultures, but those countries suffer because they don't advance women as a priority. And you have got, when you talk about development, if you want your country to truly develop, you have got to put the advancement of women first and foremost, because women are more likely to put the advancement of families first, all children, and so on. So any thoughts on that? Because I know you just kind of briefly talked about how women are not necessarily, especially in the Caribbean context, we are not necessarily, getting a fair share of anything called development. Yeah.
Well, I think, it's a complex issue, obviously, because on the one hand, we have, for the past 20 or 30 years in the Caribbean, we have a situation where when you look at our gender equality statistics, women are more educated than men for the past 20 or 30 years. Yet still, we are underrepresented in the workforce. As I mentioned earlier, we tend to be 10 to 20% less represented in the workforce than men. And when we are in the workforce, we're paid less than men. So I often say, and this is not in my report, this is a whole other, but it's very important to talk about this, because I always say that women are the most underutilized resource in the Caribbean. We are spending taxpayers' money on educating women, because in my country, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Barbados, in Jamaica, and other English-speaking Caribbean countries, the University of the West Indies, for example, and other tertiary level institutions are supported by the taxpayer. And so we're taking taxpayers' money, we're educating women, and then they have to stay home, like I did, literally for 4 years as an at-home mom, so that I could look after my children. Not that I'm saying I wouldn't rather not. I'm just saying, it is something that you would like to avoid if you could reasonably, because then what it means is that you have all of this knowledge and your country invested in this education and these skills that are then put aside and parked aside for a few years or for the rest of your life if you
Yes.
don't return to the workforce. Many women don't after they have
Yes.
children. And so, to your point, how does a country, how does a region develop if half of its population is more educated but can't work as much as the men do? And if they do, they don't get paid as much as the men do. It's almost as though you are trying your very best to stay behind, you know? And I think that this is another manifestation of unfreedoms, and it is another way in which our countries are set up in a way for us to fail. When I say us, I don't mean women, I mean as a region. The systems in our countries, the whole infrastructure, institutional makeup, and systems in our countries are designed for us to fail. Honestly, that's how I feel. And I talk about breaking the system in this report. And I would like to see a situation where we have much more community. And this is what I saw in the Pacific, where, for example, I'm sitting having lunch just before Easter weekend with the deputy prime minister in Fiji, who is an economist. He was a professor, or is a professor still. And he put together a bunch of economists from Fiji, and we're all having lunch together. And I looked to the women, there are like 4 women economists sitting to my left, and most of the people to my right were the men. So I looked to these women and I said, so what do y'all do? What are y'all looking forward to doing for Easter weekend? Are you going on a holiday with your family? What are you doing? And they said, no, we're going back to our villages. And I said, what does that, tell me about this. What does that mean? Are you not from here? This is the capital, this is Suva in Fiji. And they said, no, we have, and these are people who are indigenous, right? So in other words, they've been in this country, their people have been in this country for thousands of years. So not like us, where we are a transient people, we were brought to the Caribbean to work, right? These people have been there forever. And they said, no, we have our ancestral villages where we were born and we grew up. Some of us go to school, get educated, and go to work where overseas or in the capital, as an example. And what we do is on holidays and on weekends, we go back to our villages because that's where we have our community, that's where our family is. And it was just amazing to me, the stories they told me of the way that their communities work, where every, you know that expression, it takes a village to raise a child. They are so community minded that everybody in the community helps everybody else out. Nobody is alone doing anything on their own. It is also a risk management tech a tool. I think it's like a social security system. If anything were to happen to anybody, the community comes together and looks after the family. And so I'm saying this to say that that system gave these women in Fiji the freedom to get an education, to go to the capital and work and earn money. And their household and their kids are looked after by the community. And they can go back on the weekends and Easter. And I was just fascinated and blown away. And I just thought, wow, we have it all wrong. And they're saying things to me like, oh, we would love to hear more about what it's like in the Caribbean. There's so much we could learn from you. I'm like, no, sister. We need to learn from you guys, because this Western idea of individualism is wrong for us. I don't think that's what we were designed as human beings. But furthermore, as people coming from the global south, I don't think that's how we were made up. And there is another way. And these people in Fiji are by no means materially wealthy people, but in the Pacific, the most genuinely chilled out people you would ever meet. Why? Because they don't have the stresses we have of constantly being alone to solve problems as individuals. They have a community and they have a sense of peace and calm and tranquility and less risk because of this community.
So incredibly interesting. Sometimes on this program, I've talked about, in a more of a social context, how specifically Asian families really operate differently, in that the family itself is more important. So sometimes people even sacrifice, a career that they may have loved for themselves, because they're like, no, no, no. This isn't about you. So when you talk about this individualism, their families say, this isn't about you. You've got to become an engineer, computer sciences, a doctor, an economist. Like, there's certain professions. And then you can become an artist on the side and do that for fun. So there is a very prominent doctor here in Cayman. And I remember when I had my office in Pasadena Place, one day he came in and he was there paying his bill. And we had a little keyboard there, and he sat down and he started playing beautifully. Like, I'm like, what orchestra are you a part of? And he said, oh, this is just my hobby. I mean, his fingers were so fluid, and he's a surgeon. And I said to him, hold on a second. This isn't what you do. He's like, listen, I always wanted to be a pianist. And yes, I studied, and, I'm probably really good at it, but this is my retirement plan. When I'm done being a surgeon, because I had to be a surgeon for my family, that was the expectation. So I know we have this very Western viewpoint that, oh my gosh, my family can't tell me what to do. They can't expect me to go into a certain profession to support them. Asian, even the family stays together. The children have a social and moral obligation to take care of their parents when they get to a certain point in their lives. And there is that expectation that they will come back and, they'll live in the same household. They will take the burden off of the government of having to sustain someone in their elder years. They're not going to be living in a house all by themselves. They're like, no, our children, and to bring it at a very, understandable level, we've got a lot of fans here who watch these 90-Day Fiancé shows. And you always see the little Indian guy who marries the older American lady, and the family is like, well, what you do is you come to India and you live with us. And she's like, why on earth would I do that? Why would I be living with my in-laws and living with the whole family? But that's how it works. The family is the core of everything. And even the way in which they're structured and how they support each other is completely different. So it is a mind shift that I don't know if, as Caribbean people who are more closely aligned with the American and perhaps the European model to some extent, if we're going to really, really get that. But this transilience that you talk about, in this next quote, it says that it captures a perceived capacity to persist, adapt flexibly, and positively transform in the face of obstacles. And I mean, that's so important, because I think as time goes on, there's a question even around mental health and how it seems like we're becoming less and less resilient as we have so many amazing resources available to us. Technologically, we think, oh, we're advancing because we have all these technological tools. We're on the verge of the AI revolution is here. But the truth of the matter is, we continue to face obstacles in our daily lives and business and our communities. And we seem somehow, as individuals and as countries, and even regionally, to be less resilient. And I think that is fearful when you think about what that means. In a world that will need individuals even less, really, we just don't seem to be ready. So let's talk about, as we go through.
Ms. Sandra, could I just interrupt you there for 1 second,
Absolutely.
please, to talk about that word transilience? And so I deliberately use transilience versus resilience. And we talk about resilience all the time in the Caribbean. It's almost an obsession. But when you talk about resilience, what are you talking about? You're talking about being able to stay the way we are. That's what resilience is. Being able to defend what we have now, who we are now, where we're at now. When you think about it, are we in a great place? I don't think so. I really don't think so. I really don't think most of us in the Caribbean as economies are where we should be. And so should we be really talking about resilience, as in being able to withstand the external pressures so that we can retain whatever we are now? Or should we be thinking about becoming something else? And that's what transilience is. Transilience is using the obstacles and the challenges not to try to get back to where we were, but to try to become something else, something better that is not affected by the challenges as we used to be. And so I am talking not about resilience. I'm talking about transilience. I'm talking about true transformation into something else. So just a small example. When we look at Caribbean structures, economic structures, and this is something we talked about on the last time you interviewed me, which of course still stands as the best interview I ever had. But we talked a lot about tourism, right? And that tourism is actually the biggest industry in the Caribbean in terms of the number of people employed in the tourism sector. But we have a tourism sector in the Caribbean that for most countries is not creating the outcomes that we need. So for example, we don't know if it's a net addition to the foreign exchange earnings in our country. And we don't know if it's a net addition to the fiscal earnings in any country in the Caribbean, because we're not measuring it. And I think there's a reason why the governments are not measuring it. And so the point I'm trying to make is we have a structure that isn't working for us, and we need to transform into something better. We need to be willing to break everything that we know so that we can be something better. If we keep holding on to resilience in terms of maintaining what we have now, we will never be better. And I want us to recognize that we could be better, because when you look at other countries that are former colonies, they are better. I mean, I don't need to point to Singapore. Singapore had the same GDP per capita as Jamaica, if not less, when it became independent. And look at Singapore now, and look at these islands in the Pacific that I was mentioning. You know, so it is within our capacity to be something else and to transform into something better. If Fiji and Vanuatu could have done it, we could too. And that's what I'm trying to get at. So sorry for cutting you there, but I just wanted to make the distinction between transilience and resilience.
Yes. And it's important to understand some of these words that you use and in the context in which you're actually using them as well. So this transilience, and I see Jim is paying very, very good attention. He says it's resistance to change. But you talk about changing people's mindsets. And I can tell you, I've read so many texts on this. It's the most difficult thing in the world to do, is to change how someone thinks. So we do it in small, manageable bites. And in fact, someone said to me this morning, and I take it on board, they say that, good morning. Anytime someone is talking something that is educational, we Caymanians run away, and I wonder why. Lord help these beautiful islands. So we have over 200 people listening to Ms. Marla, which I will tell you is still amazing. And it's, far more than anybody else would have this morning for a topic like this. But if I was sitting here having one of my gossipy moments, talking about something totally ridiculous, I could easily have double or triple that number. And I get it. I know that this is challenging. This is a challenging conversation for people to listen to. And, we're trying to break it down where it's a manageable process, but it takes time, folks. So baby steps. There's a lot of people who won't even touch a report like this. And I hear you. I hear what you say. Wow, we don't have 5 people listening, 500 people. But if you were talking something ridiculous in somebody's business or whatever, some salacious court case, we would have that number. That's okay. We still make the avenue, the vehicle available for people to learn the information. And this will be on, the platform, so people can go back later on and take it in, because sometimes it's very difficult for people to absorb this, maybe even during drive time. They're like, oh my God, this is too much. But tonight they can sit back and listen and take notes and understand exactly what it is that Ms. Marla is saying. So thank you for all of you who are here. and who are asking some very, very interesting questions. And as I said, that we will open up some the phone lines a little bit later on. So we'll get there. So someone says, okay, are you taking calls yet? Because I'm rocking at the edge of my seat to ask questions. Jot down your questions because we do want to go through some elements of the report beforehand. So this is a significant report. And I put the link in the chat because, again, Miss Marla does this. These are free, and we want to, share as many of these as possible. So let's talk about, there's several words in here that you use, or several phrases that I think perhaps we could do a quick, rapid definition of. What is SIDS, S-I-D-S?
Small island developing states. So like all of us in the Caribbean. But interestingly, they include in that definition countries that are not necessarily islands, but have similar political and social and cultural and historical commonalities. So countries like Belize and Suriname and Guyana, which are not islands, of course, are counted in the SIDS, bucket
category. All right. So they share unique sustainable development challenges, including smaller populations, limited resources, geographic remoteness a lot of times, vulnerability to natural disasters. We're going to talk about that. Dependence on international trade and fragile environments. How many of those describe Cayman to a T? I mean, seriously, that's us.
All.
Exactly.
Yep.
And one of the things that Ms. Marla gets to in her report is the fact that we are the most vulnerable to climate change and external economic shocks. And that's a big one.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. All right. So we're going to get there. I just want to throw out a few definitions. Yes. Global South. What's the Global South?
So, there's all kinds of debate around that definition. But the Global South, first of all, when you look at a map of the world, the Global South is mostly just that, south of the equator, because you have developing countries that dominate Latin America, Africa as a continent, and, Southeast Asia, and then you have the Pacific. Now, in the South, you also have Australia and New Zealand, which are not part of the Global South. They're part of the geopolitical term of the Global North. But generally, there is if you look at the world's map, it's very interesting. Apart from New Zealand and Australia, most of the developed countries, quote unquote, or high income countries are north, and most of the underdeveloped countries are in the south. It's really interesting. And you wonder, how did that happen? But so the Global South is really capturing the developing countries. Generally, that's like another way of looking at the Global South.
Yes. All right. So it refers to countries in Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia, excluding Japan, and Oceania, which are generally less economically developed and have been historically subject to colonization and exploitation by the global north. This colonization, we didn't have much of a choice, I suppose, in colonization. And it's crazy to me that people think it has somehow ended, right? That we were colonized, now we're kind of free, we're still in overseas territory. But, colonization doesn't exist anymore, we're fine. Let's talk about the impacts of colonization, because there have been so many stories about, for example, Jamaica, the banana industries, coffee industries, different industries, that once certain countries decided to seek their independence from, even in just a formal way, from being colonized, they were really their economies were put under pressure by the same countries that were, Mother England, Mother Spain, or the UK, or whatever. They then put these same countries under a lot of economic pressure, a number of trade pressures, where it's almost like they want us to fail. Am I over analyzing this?
No, I think whether it's intentional or accidental, it is a fact that the Global South has been marginalized by the policies of the global north. So let's go back to, you started with colonization. Like I mentioned earlier, if you look at the number of, it's 36 jurisdictions we have in the
Yes.
Caribbean, and most of us are still colonies, meaning Dutch, French, US, UK territories, right? So we're still more a colonized region than we are an independent region. So that's the first thing. So colonization has not ended, not by that yardstick in any event. And let's go back to how this happened. So, of course, we know Columbus arrived in the Caribbean and he met the indigenous people here. And this was happening more and more across the Caribbean and Latin America and North America and so on, where the explorers came and found territories that were populated. So by no means did they discover. They didn't discover us, right? We existed, and we had people living in societies here in the Caribbean and in Latin America. Of course, the Mayan and Aztec cultures and societies were probably the most advanced that this hemisphere has ever seen. When you look at the kind of, I mean, we still can't figure out the Aztec calendar, for example. You know, so so by no means were these backward cultures, right? These were thriving societies. And then Christopher Columbus and the Spanish imperials, the monarch, they were faced with this problem. How do we just come and conquer these people? And so then the Roman Catholic Church came up with something called the doctrine of discovery, where the Roman, and of course, church and state worked closely together back then, right? There was no separation really between church and state. And the Roman Catholic Church, through its doctrine of discovery, which was only recently repealed by the now deceased Pope Francis.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Where basically the Catholic Church said, okay, you can go ahead, and once you land somewhere, you know, based on this doctrine of discovery, you're free to occupy and colonize these people, capture these people, colonize them, and convert them to Christianity, by the way. So the church worked hand in hand with the explorers and the monarch that funded them to do this exploration, to come to this part of the world and conquer us. Well, not really us. It was the indigenous people. I'm not indigenous, so can't say us, but you know what I mean. Indigenous Caribbean, West Indian people, and that's how it all started. And then you had a history of a few centuries of colonization, not just of the Caribbean, but I mentioned in the report, for example, that when the UK colonized, when Britain colonized India, India was one of the global powers back then, and was, I can't remember, let me pull it up, how much percent of GDP that India was, that India accounted for. And then by the time Britain was finished with her, she was 4% of GDP. Let me find that quote for you, because it's something that really struck me.
Yes. And while you're having a look at that, I just want to read this bit from the report about the Global South. It says that 6 out of 7
It's at the bottom of page 1, by the way. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. The Global South constitutes 6 out of 7 persons on the planet.
About 80-something% of the population
crazy.
of this planet. Yes, yet we're the ones who are developing and underdeveloped. And if 88 or 85% of the world's population is underdeveloped, then it tells you something is really wrong with the system. So basically, Great Britain accounted for 6% of global GDP in the early 1800s. But about 100 years later, on the eve of World War I, that 6% more than doubled to 14%. And that's, of course, when they had colonized all of us, including India. Now, India accounted for anywhere between 25 to 35% of global GDP when Christ was born. so 2000 years ago, and India was bigger than the whole of Europe. But when Britain was finished with India, India accounted for 4% of global GDP in
Oh my
1947.
gosh.
So this tells you how this colonization didn't
Yes.
mean that we all grew. It meant
No.
that some grew at the expense of others. It was parasitic. It was not symbiotic. It was not, yes, so it was parasitic. And that system, that parasitic system that, basically was born in the late, say, 1400s, 1500, or early 1500s, and existed for hundreds of years till the 1900s. So 400 years of a system that was created and developed and strengthened to extract, as a parasite would, from the global south to enrich the global north. And all of this is factual. I mean, people can be uncomfortable about it and can not like what I'm saying, but I'm not the one writing history. I'm just an economist interpreting the history that
Yes.
I've read.
Yeah. And one of the great things that Miss Marla does here in her report is she gives you the links to the information so you can go and look at it for yourself. And I must say that the link here, which I opened at this cepr.org website, is so just incredible. And it talks about slavery and the British Industrial Revolution. And the bottom line is the wealth that was derived from slavery has contributed to not just European economic growth, but including the United States of America and all of the G7 nations when you really look at it. So yes, this is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to admit that these nations have become, world and global powers on the backs of slavery. And that's just a
Absolutely.
fact. So,
It's a
we have
fact.
to accept, yes, we have to accept certain things. And when you look at, and this paragraph kind of encapsulates it, but in a very condensed way. But when you look at how on earth do you go from having that type of like doubling your GDP in such a short space of time, you do that because you were pillaging, raping villages from their natural resources. India was decimated in terms of the mining, and whether it was gold or diamonds or whatever resources they had. And there's even an argument in today's context that this still hasn't changed. The United States of America tends to want to get involved in other people's affairs when their own interest is, at risk, not in terms of safety, but in terms of like oil reserves and things like that. That's what they care about the most. And so it is a very, very interesting concept in this subsection called the shackles of history. We have to understand how the shackles of history continue to play a really, really important role today. Let's talk about just the American context for a bit. There's so much going on right now that is absolutely shocking with their current president. He's just passed a bill that is going to see millions of people in the world die. This isn't fear mongering. The U.S. does provide aid to countries, so to some extent they have attempted to I don't want to say undo their wrongs, but they've attempted to do the right thing, right, by countries that they have unfortunately pillaged for a really, really long time. So these countries rely on U.S. aid. And as a result of this bill that he's passing, for the first time, something like, I think the numbers might be 14 million people. There's going to be 14 million additional deaths globally over the next 5 years, because of the toll that the government's dismantling of the largest AIDS agency worldwide, which this is all the Trump administration, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, by the Trump administration. 14 million people will die over the next 4 years as a direct result of that decision. It's just absolutely crazy. That's the impact outside of the U.S. the impact in the US in terms of what he's doing globally, taking, in his own country, my apologies, taking away, funding for after school programs. So now children who had safe after school programs will no longer have it available to them. There is one singular sort of federal after school program, and that is now going to disappear. People who are in Medicaid and other benefits are going to disappear. So the main school administration, District 54, which serves more than 2,200 students throughout K through 12, those children participate in what's called a 21st century community learning program. It's a federally funded after school program, which provides $1.1 million to kindergarten through 8th grade throughout the year. And that spreads out over 4 years, that $1.1 million. That program, because of the budget cuts, is now going to disappear. And as a result of that, you will now have children who, this is, by the way, the only federal after school program, the only one. And now you're going to have at least 130 plus students who could attend summer camps, and they had activities including creative writing, culinary arts, physical education, and STEM. They will no longer have access to any of that. How does that benefit America? So we have to, and it's not, like I said, there's a big trickle down effect, because when people start to think this way in one country, there is a domino effect in other countries as well. So we have to be so incredibly careful. The ideologies that we are, accepting around the world, and the behaviors that we look at and we say, oh, well, that's acceptable because, he's all of a sudden controlling American immigration, which is absolutely ridiculous. But these are big issues, right? So let's go back to Ms. Marla's report, because everything is interconnected here. Europe, this wealth extraction that you talk about from colonizers, fueled the industrial and socioeconomic expansion of the global north, of course, to the detriment of the global south. And it was a disproportionate. I mean, nobody can look at this and say that we benefited from this in any way, being part of the global south. And it's just shocking. So this global carbon project, I thought was very, very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about what the data from that demonstrated as well. And I'll pull that up on the screen for our viewers.
So basically, Europe industrialized, largely using the wealth and resources extracted from its colonies, right? From slavery and colonization. It industrialized, and the emissions that were, emitted at that time, that is in the atmosphere, that scientists, I'm not trying to argue with scientists, and people argue all the time that this is climate change, and climate change happens all the time. There is natural climate change, and then there's man-made climate change. And the science tells us that these excess emissions, which the global north is responsible for 90% of those excess emissions, occurred during their industrialization. And climate change, man-made climate change, is being driven by these excess emissions. And who is the most vulnerable to the climate change being caused by these excess emissions? We are in SIDS, specifically in the Pacific and the Caribbean. And so it means that we're punished twice. And I specifically state that in the report. We're punished once by colonization, slavery, and the exploitation and the parasitic type of relationship. And then now we're being punished where climate change is upon us, and we have to cope with it. And then the third thing is, we are being asked in the global south, so countries like India, for example, as well as other large global south countries like Pakistan, Nigeria, Indonesia, Philippines, and then we have us as tiny islands, we're being told that we have to develop in a carbon neutral manner, in a net zero manner. So, in other words, the global north was allowed to develop without having to think about its emissions. We
Yes.
now are struggling to develop, and we're being told, no, but you can't burn all of that gas. Like, I don't know if you recall, there was an interview recently, the BBC interviewed the Prime Minister of Guyana and basically said to him, you are at a time when the planet can least afford it, you're pulling all of this oil out of the ground and you're exploiting your natural resources and you're going to make climate change worse. And he's like, hang on a second. Who are you? You're still pulling oil out of the ground in the North Sea, by the way. And you're telling me about extracting my oil when you've been, first of all, for example, they extracted oil out of Trinidad for 100 years. Trinidad has been producing oil for over 100 years. And so, how
Yes.
can you then take this sort of sanctimonious approach with Guyana and say you need to leave your oil? But Guyana has development needs, okay? Education, healthcare, infrastructure, like any other developing country. And so, we're being pressured to not pollute. And then there's the right to pollute. That's a whole other, which I kind of touched on in the report. This is something that's being debated on the international scale now and being decided who has the right to pollute to what extent. A big part of the whole journey that we are going to have to try to navigate. And so, which is why, again, we need transilience and resilience. We cannot be trying to go back to who we used to be after the shock, after the hurricane, after the COVID. No, no, no. We have to be something different. We have to be something different because what we're going back to your point, SIDS are less than 2% of global emissions. Yet we're being told we have to develop. And you heard that Dominica, after Hurricane Irma, had said it will be the first net zero country in the world. I know Barbados has a target of net zero by 2050, I think, or carbon neutral by 20. I can't remember which term they used. And I'm thinking it's all well and good to be net zero, but it's not going to help the global carbon emissions. And, because we're less than 2%, all of us together. So we're not going to put a dent in the problem. So I think that we need to rethink. And right now there's this conference in Sevilla in Spain where they're discussing the fact that 52 countries globally are at risk of debt distress, which I discussed in the report. And these are all countries in the global south. And we've borrowed from the global north. And we're saying we can't afford this debt. Could you help us? And the answer is, we'll think about it. We'll have some dialogue around it, basically. We commit to having dialogue around it.
Yes.
Why? Because the system is created for us to be only borrowing from the global north and to be beholden and to be dependent on the global north. It's a system. It's a parasitic system that took, 400 years to develop, and it works well.
All right, folks. So we're gonna do. Perhaps this is a good time to take a little break. But again, this report is very, very detailed. Trendsetter is very into it. She said, "Miss Marla, what's your contact information?" So she's easy to find, marladukharan.com. And I've actually put the link in the report. Someone asked me for it in WhatsApp, and I've sent it to WhatsApp as well directly. So if you'd like it on WhatsApp, just simply let me know, and I'll send you the link. Because the one thing that I am very, very cognizant of, folks, is information and knowledge is meant to be shared. It is not something that we keep to ourselves. It is not something that benefits us when we're trying to hide it. And it's like the little guy from what is that movie? He had the little ring, Lord of the Rings, where he has his little ring and he's like, mine, and he's trying to hide it. Yes, precious. It is precious, but it is meant to be shared so that we all can get to a place of being a bit more forward thinking and figuring out how we can help ourselves as being part of the SIDS of of the South, the global South. So Europe's wealth, listen to this, Europe's wealth and also that of the US initially derived largely from colonization and slavery, and was and still is so obviously important to them that these colonizers created tax havens in the Caribbean, Cayman Islands, and elsewhere to hide their sugar and slave wealth during the independence and decolonization era. And their international tax framework underpins the global tax injustices the global South experiences today. Look at the European Union, the UK, OECD, FATF, etc. Disproportionately label predominantly global South countries, especially SIDS, and small countries, though they conveniently leave out the smallest country on earth, as the world's most prolific tax haven, money launderers, and financiers of terrorism. The United States of America has more fake countries in Delaware than anywhere else, and yet they want to talk about, they've done features and special programs on, oh, this building in the Cayman Islands and Ugland House has X number of companies that shell companies. The truth is very, very interesting when you try to dissect it. So I think we're going to take a little bit of a break. Ms. Marla can refresh, get a cup of coffee or whatever, and then we're going to come back and open up the phone lines and start to take some of your questions and comments. But there's just so much to unpack in this report. We're only on page 2 of 10. I feel like we need to do another day of this to kind of go through this in more details. But here is one thing that is very, very interesting, talking about the economy, right? The Caribbean tax frameworks today are predominantly regressive and are therefore pro-poverty and pro-brain drain. Oh my gosh, talking about the BVI, Barbados. We had Paul here. Paul is a regular listener to the program, and Paul is from Bermuda, and he wants to know, is Bermuda considered part of the Caribbean? So we're going to answer that question and others when we come back. So let's just take a quick little commercial break, and we will come back with your questions and thoughts and comments after this.
For the past 58 years, CUC has strived to be more than just an electricity provider. We have sought to be a foundational company. We give back to our community, and with the hard work and dedication of our employees, we have built and maintained one of the safest and most reliable electricity grids in the region. As we all look to the future, we at CUC want the Grand Cayman community to have confidence that our commitment to you will continue. Join us as we continue this journey together at empoweringcayman.com.
24, Health City Cayman Islands continued to redefine what's possible. From new technologies to expanded care, our impact reached further than ever before. We achieved significant milestones, including our team going overseas to retrieve an ECMO patient by air ambulance, the official opening of Health City at Camana Bay, launching robotic-assisted joint replacements with the introduction of the Corey robot, purchasing shares in Doctors Hospital Health Systems Limited in the Bahamas to extend the reach of our care, and welcoming the first Health City babies. Since inception, we have provided care for hundreds of thousands of patients across multiple touchpoints, with nearly 287,000 outpatients, over 20,000 inpatients, 22,000 plus emergencies treated, and over 1,900 sleep studies conducted. Our experienced surgeons have performed routine and complex procedures with consistently excellent results. We've performed 3,210 orthopedic surgeries, and 1,659 cardiac surgeries, just over 1,000 neurosurgeries, and nearly 6,000 gastroenterology procedures. With our state-of-the-art cath lab, we have performed advanced interventions in adult cardiology, pediatrics, cardiac surgery, interventional neurology, intensive radiology, nephrology, and gastroenterology. We are proud to have launched Health City Cares, our official corporate social responsibility arm. Through this initiative, our team engaged in impactful outreach activities. We sponsored community programs and inspired the next generation of healthcare professionals, with our Healthcare Explorers program reaching 64,000 student encounters. We're excited to celebrate 11 years of healing lives and breaking barriers. Our mission to deliver world-class accessible healthcare continues.
All right, folks. Took a little commercial break there. We're back. Thank you so much, Miss Marla. There you are. So we want to now delve into, some of your questions and comments. There was just one more thing that I wanted to throw up here, which, oh my gosh, they couldn't wait, Miss Marla. They're like, I'm calling right now before anybody else does. Good morning, caller. Welcome to the program. Oh, hold on one second, honey child. I can't hear you. The phone sometimes is very temperamental. I have to plug it in and out of the board. All right, let's see. Did that work? Hello? No, it didn't. All right, let me just restart. Sometimes a restart helps with the iPhone. Give me one quick second. I'm going to do a quick reboot, and then it should connect. It doesn't always like to be connected to stuff. You'll see the little message. I see something connected, and I don't know what that is. All right, so yes, we are going to open the phone lines now for your undoubtedly thought-provoking questions. But while we are just restarting the phone, this one here kind of had me scratching my head about the policies and initiatives that we as a region and as individual countries adopt that really are counterproductive. So it says here in the British Virgin Islands, which is a UK overseas territory, Barbados, for example, individuals and wages are taxed at a much higher rate than corporate profits. Not only is this approach regressive, it is socially unjust, and irrespective of external pressures from the EU, OECD, etc. If SIDS fail to transform our inherited domestic tax structures, we will continue to experience brain drain, shrinking tax bases, and poor socioeconomic outcomes. So this is interesting because you say that Cayman is an anomaly in sort of how we have developed and perhaps how we've done certain things. But at the same time, this made me pause and think, are we down a slippery slope that is not going to be beneficial to us?
Yeah, I think I've commented on this before on a report I did on Cayman in early 2024, Ms. Sandra, where I don't have the actual data on all the effects of the existing tax system in Cayman. You don't have an income tax, whereas BVI and Barbados do. But you have taxes on property and, well, they're called indirect taxes, and custom duties you have, right? My guess is, based on what I've seen and based on the amount of outcry on the cost of living, my guess is that this tax structure that you have in Cayman more heavily penalizes those at the lower income spectrum versus the higher income, higher end of the income spectrum. And that would mean it is regressive. Again, this is just based on a few, I guess, back of the envelope calculations. I don't have, the data is not there for me to make a proper calculation as to whether it's a progressive or neutral or regressive system, but I think it's regressive in Cayman as well. Not as regressive as BVI and Barbados, because of course you don't have an income tax, a personal income tax, which they do. So can you imagine taxing teachers, with nurses, at rates that are higher than what you're taxing corporate profits? That's, to me, that's like
that's crazy.
Socially unjust. It is.
Yeah.
And it's pro-poverty. It is. And that's not anybody's fault. That's not the colonizer's
Yes.
fault. And I make it very clear in my report as well
Mm-hmm.
that, by the way, there are other colonies that have succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
And we are well in control of our domestic policy agenda, and we can change these things, but we don't have the leaders who are brave enough to make changes sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Caller, good morning. Yes, sir. I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you so much. I think she might have frozen just a little bit. Can you hear him okay?
I am hearing you, Miss Sandra, but I'm not hearing
You're not
the
hearing
caller.
him. Okay,
No.
give me 1 second. I'm going to hopefully correct that. All right, just repeat that for me, caller. Uh-oh, caller? Okay, let me try one more thing. I think it's a setting on my side.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm hearing him now.
Okay, perfect. Yes,
no,
sir.
I was saying good morning to you and good morning to Ms. Dukharan.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning.
Ms. Dukharan, I had a question for you, right? You know, in doing a cursory reading of the report that you produced, right? You define transilience as, you know, the capacity to persist, adapt flexibly, and, you know, positively transform in the face of obstacles. What concrete indicators beyond GDP would let a Caribbean finance minister know that her country is actually becoming transilient rather than merely resilient plus? How would you track those indicators year on year?
I love that question because, you know, I love the data, and you too, Miss Sandra. We love the data, right? Thank you, caller, for that question. In the first place, we have no mechanism now to track resilience, let alone transilience. So that is something that we would have to design. I did cite in my report a few countries that are measuring different things besides GDP. So you have Bhutan with the the gross national happiness measurement. I did cite Cayman as you have a well-being index. And so what we would have to do is, like you did in Cayman and like Bhutan did, we would have to come up with a measure that looks at the kinds of results of transformation and the policy reform agenda. If we embark on a transilience agenda, we would have to design a metric that measures the outcomes of those policies that we are implementing. So, for example, let's say as part of our transilience approach, we decide to incentivize every household to become more energy efficient by installing renewable or solar. Let's say solar, okay? And let's say in our transilience reform agenda, we want to make sure that each household is energy independent. Let's say, I'm not saying that this is desirable. I'm just saying, just as an example. Then what you would do is you would create a measure that every year would be a survey that goes around household to household, just like you do for the census, just like you did for the well-being index. And you would ask the household how much of your electricity is off the grid versus on the grid. And that way you track whether or not you're making progress towards achieving that resilience metric that you're trying to achieve. So it would depend on what your policy agenda is, and those are the things you will have to measure, is what I'm trying to say.
Caller?
Okay. Sorry. I mean, I don't want to hog the line, but Sandra, you know, you have to invite Miss Dukharan to one of your cookouts so I can knock dominoes with her and ask questions, right? But I have one more question for Ms. Dukharan, if you'll indulge me. Right?
Sure.
Based on what you just said, I'm aware that a lot of Caribbean publics have grown wary of grand regional schemes that yield little on the ground, right? How would you secure broad-based buy-in, you know, from the fisher folk in Dominica to the fintech entrepreneurs in Barbados, that this transilience framework is more than just a rebranding exercise?
Well, first of all, the Transilience framework is not a framework. In this report, I did not outline what Transilience looks like simply because it is something that each country will have to decide on its own. But what I am saying is we should not be trying to build back better. We shouldn't be going back anywhere. We shouldn't be trying to build resilience so that we can maintain what we have. I'm saying we need to transform into something better. Given the circumstances that we exist in, given the renewed pressure on global emissions, etc., I'm saying we need to transform. For example, right now there's a conference in Sevilla around financing for development. And the Bridgetown Initiative, which I discussed at length in this report, talks about greater access of countries like ours in the global south to debt to finance development. And I'm saying absolutely not. We should not be borrowing to finance no development. These access to financing should be grant based and not debt based. And we should be embarking on a real transformation of our economies to make us better than we are and better than we were. And for each country, that would look different. Now, in some countries, you might say agriculture needs to be a big part of your reform agenda. And absolutely, food security is a big issue. But then you have countries like Curacao, that's a desert, and they can only grow aloe. How you could tell them to be, to have food security? You can't. It has to be a very localized agenda. It cannot be a regional agenda. By no means am I suggesting that this should be a regional framework. Absolutely not.
All right, caller. Thank you. Thank you very much. Someone says they got a 6 love waiting for you, Marla.
Okay.
At the Domino's table.
At the Domino's. Okay.
Yes.
I accept the challenge.
This quote here says, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change." Wow.
Basically, it's saying the system created by the master is never going to make us free. Never going to make us free.
Right. Do we have the tools then to create our own systems? This is the real question.
Absolutely, we do. Absolutely, we do. We have evidence across small island developing states, as I mentioned, in the Pacific that I think have done a lot better in terms of social and social justice and equality and freedoms than we have. So absolutely, we have the tools. We just, again, it starts with the mindset, but also breaking the systems. Now, I like to point to Jamaica, where, Jamaica, as we know, is, of course, the largest in terms of population in the English-speaking Caribbean and has had a really troubled history. But in the last 12 years, Jamaica has made remarkable progress. Right now, Jamaica has the lowest poverty rate it's ever had, the lowest unemployment rate it's ever had. They don't have enough people in Jamaica to fill jobs. So if Jamaica could do it in 12 years based on where they started from, I think we can make progress. Now, Jamaica has a long way to go, of course, crime being a big challenge and social inequity being another big challenge, but they've made a lot of progress. And to me, if it's one country that gives us hope in the region, it's Jamaica.
Wow, that's fantastic. All right, so phone lines are open, 936-2626. We're going to go through some of the comments as well. Let me see. Trendsetter says this is history for each and everyone should know. So Miss Sandy, I appreciate this lady who's sharing all of this. Someone also asked the question, I think somebody's calling my personal number, so make sure you know the right number. Someone was asking the question if this is going to be Miss Marla's show because they want her on here as a regular feature. So we have her on here as a guest, but we are hoping that she will be joining the CMR TV family with her own programming that you guys will be able to tune in separately. But of course, all of the content creators, I encourage them from time to time to definitely come on my show. So for example, Dr. Carla, who's a clinical psychologist, Dr. Carlos, my apologies. He's going to initially start out coming on my show every Wednesday starting next week. And then we will transition and do his pull-out show separate and apart. But because he is doing a call-in show, I will be here with him to facilitate the calls and the comments. Good morning, caller. How are you?
Good morning, Sandra. How are you?
Yes, good morning. Good. How are you?
I just wanted to say thanks a lot, Sandra, for discussing this report. I met Dr. Marla at the Chamber of Commerce forum that they had a few months ago, and I think he brings such valid points. It's a pity, she's a woman, and of course, a lot of her points, because she's a woman, not that they're not being heard, but I just think that our government would be great to really sit down to the table and listen to the stuff and take it in. Because like she said, the stuff that we're seeing happening now with the WEF, the World Health Organization, I mean, how do you sit down and plot betterment for your people, but yet the rest of the world is planning death? I don't understand. It's sad to see how hard our parents and ancestors work. And instead, like she said, instead of we progressing, we are regressing. How do you find hope? How do we give our young people and our students in schools, that encouragement, the empowerment, the light that they need to say, should we continue when there's just so much darkness around? And this island is, we have so much money going through it. And I do believe that, like she said, we can turn it around, but we must be able to be strong enough to do it. And I just wanted to say thank you to a woman again, to two women, actually. Sandra, for bringing it, again, to our attention, to the forefront, but also to Dr. Marla, to also to being very brave and to actually being clear and concise and saying exactly what we need to hear. And I just hope that so many women would listen, stand together, rather trying to take part and do the right thing. It's going to take women, Sandra, it's not going to take men. I say it all the time. If I had the money, I would try to put a whole woman government in, because I'm not saying that men haven't done and are not valid and haven't brought good to the table, but I do believe it's going to be women. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, really, really interesting. And I kind of want to preface, this is a little bit political, and I do want to preface this comment, right? We have to take women that are centered and that understand the objective and that actually care about it. Because when you have women in political power who are trying to be like the men, there's this whole concept of swimming with the sharks versus the dolphins and whatever, right? And some of us as women feel like we have to redefine who we are. So we lose all the elements, all the positives that we were talking about that come with, our feminism, that come with being nurturers and mothers and that sort of thing. We lose that because we want to compete with the men. So we become one of them. Not for nothing, but we've seen that type of female leadership right here in the Cayman Islands, and that does not serve us well. We either become tools for the men to use and abuse, and we don't have a mind of our own, so they're here dictating and telling us what to do, or Damien feels that one, or we try to become one of them and we forget that we are different and we rule differently, we think differently. But sometimes I think that depending on the environment that you've grown up in, that maybe you don't have the benefit of, thinking that you don't have to be like one of them in order to survive and be successful in your own right. Damien says maybe it's a little bit of of low self-esteem. Male-centered women are not allies, says Sarah. So yeah, be careful. They say, be careful what you ask for. That's for sure. There was a very interesting, I don't know if you saw this, Miss Marla. I'm probably going to totally butcher his name. But about a month ago, there was a very, very interesting speech at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, about African economies. This guy is President Ibrahim, the last name, Traore. I'm not sure if I'm getting it, but he is the president of a very, very small nation Burkina Faso, and he made this speech that, let me tell you something. He said, I am not going to bow to American and Western pressures. That is not who I am. And boy, I listened to it and I was so impassioned afterwards. And so I felt so empowered. The man, facts, he just spoke facts. And in such an eloquent way. And can I tell you something? No prepared speech, no written speech. This man, I'm going to play a little snippet of it here. I'm just seeing if I can download it. But this man blew me away. I was just like, who is he? What is this? It was amazing. Did you see it, Miss Marla?
I saw the text of it. I didn't see the delivery.
Oh my
but I
gosh.
also like the Colombian president as well. He's also one of those who's like, I'm sorry, you could be, and we talk about David and Goliath. But the global south is 88% of the globe's population. So who's the David and who's the Goliath?
Exactly.
So they might be stronger military wise, but in terms of number of people, and natural resources, the global south is much more dominant. And I feel like there is these narratives like David and Goliath and this global south, or, third world, or, I feel like these terms are, pejorative and condition us to think that we are weaker, lesser, somehow create some insecurity.
Yes.
When in fact, we are 88% of the world's population.
Imagine if collectively we work together. So Sarah says Ibrahim is everything. The pronunciation is Traore. Okay. Thank you, Damien. Appreciate the phonetics. I wasn't sure. I was like, it sounds a little French, actually. Shackles says amen to that caller for pointing out the female positivity in socioeconomic development, especially in the political arena. And again, we need to recognize our power and utilize it in a very, very effective way. When the previous caller, the male caller, said, how do we do this? Where do we start? For me, and just thinking of my own personal journey and from whence I've cometh sort of vibe, right? You have got to start with education. That's the game changer. And, my life story, Marla, would have been so much different had I not been extracted from Cayman, extracted from the dysfunctional and chaotic environment that I was in, and put in an environment where I had opportunities, I had a chance to get an education and to see that, wow, there are different things that you can accomplish in this world. Even as we are, like I said, in this technological revolution, the AI revolution, all this sort of stuff, you won't get or understand any of it if you don't have the ability to take in information and to understand. And that starts with having a good foundation in logic, being able to think for yourself and not have other people dictate what is right and what is wrong in terms of even how we think, because that happens every single day. So thank you so much, Lisa. Gabby says, yeah, boy, he made us want to go and throw on a camouflage gear and start a revolution. It was quite inspiring. And like I said, in a little bit, I'm going to play a little snippet of it. It is very, very long. And I could not believe how long this man spoke for without a single piece of paper. And it was poetic. It was the delivery. Like if you read it, you're like, oh, this is fantastic. I'm inspired. But when you actually hear his delivery, I was just like, is he reading from a teleprompter? Where's the speech? It was just absolutely transformative. Let me say that. So this is a fantastic report, folks. MarlaDukharan.com. You can find it. There's a bit here about how justice has a price. Oh, my God. I feel like I know this all too well. All right, we've got a caller. Good morning, caller. Oh, they called. I think they want me to read a comment. Normally, if they call and hang up, they're like, Sandy, read this. Oh, yes. Okay. Give me 1 second. I'm going to screen grab it so that everyone can see. By the way, don't forget, folks, you can tune in this evening at 5 o'clock. We have former Minister of Health and Wellness and parliamentarian, Miss Sabrina Turner. She now has her own show on CMR TV platform. It's called Sabrina Speaks, and she's just getting warmed up because she's going to be doing all of this on her own, like what I do. And it takes a minute to kind of get used to it. So please, give her lots of grace and lots of patience. And I've been with her, sitting with her this week as she kind of learns the ropes. But soon I'm going to let her go. And that's going to be it. She's going to be flying on her own. So I know that you guys have been so supportive this week of her, and I'm sure that that will continue. So this one says, can you please ask Ms. Dukharan these other questions I wanted to ask her on air, please? You touch on with radical degrowth and donut models. Historical evidence shows that economic slowdowns often hit informal and care sectors where women cluster first. What transition cushions, for example, universal basic services, targeted cash, would protect them if throughput really shrinks? Oh, that's a good one. Wow.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that if we go back to community-based models, like I mentioned, that exists in the Pacific, I think that in itself is a protection. But there are also other ways that you can design interventions from the state. I kind of don't like having a system where we're dependent on the state. But you can have private insurances and so on. I think it's something that we would have to think through once we determine what is the development model we're going to pursue. Because the donut economics and the degrowth system, of course, has some transformation that has to take place. And I guess based on what the transformation looks like, you have to then design the policies that will help to manage the risks, for example, of women being affected by this. But it's an excellent question. And the second part of Transilience money is ring-fenced for gender programs. Who sets the conditions? Local women. How will you avoid the history of development projects in which gender conditionalities become box ticking?
Exercises, yeah.
I think that in the first place, Transilience and any kind of development model has to come from the people. I think you have to survey your people and ask them. And countries like Cayman is small enough to do it and say, what would you like your country to look, your society, I shouldn't say country, look like in 20 years? What would you like your children's lives to look like? And you kind of work backwards from there. If you want a highly materialistic, individualistic society like North America, well, fine, you put the policies in place to get you there. Whereas if you want something that's more balanced, where we're not so individualistic and materialistic and more community-centered, which is what I think is what we need to get back to, which is what I saw in the Pacific and clearly works well for them. I think it will require a different development trajectory. But in any event, I feel like we need to ask people.
Do you have capacity for a little bit of overtime this morning, Ms. Marla?
Sure.
Normally we end at 9:30, but okay, great. Caller, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Sandra, I just wanted to say you are correct. Just take President Ibrahim Traore. He's doing such an excellent job. Look at this world. Look at what we're going through, what we're seeing right now. And he took the chance to turn everything around with people. It also takes a good heart. That's the thing I want to say quickly before you go. It takes heart.
Yes.
Because if your heart is in the right place, Sandra, you will do everything to make sure not just you, your family, but everyone around you survive and progresses.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a combination of having your heart and your head in the right place, because so many of us are driven by self-interest and greeds before anything else, even politically, and that is a problem. You can't get in there thinking about the glory of how your personal agendas or your personal projects are going to be remembered in history. You have to do the right thing, and sometimes we struggle with being remembered historically and just doing the right thing, regardless of how people see you. So, you put yourself on the line and you question the status quo, and you become an agitator. I remember recently I went to a particular forum with some people in the business community, and they said, well, how do you feel that people see CMR traditionally as an agitator, troublemaker? And I was like, what's the problem? I mean, it's like shame on you. And I said, there have been a lot of agitators and so-called troublemakers historically who have changed the course of a lot of things in the world. So many times we are afraid of being labeled in a particular way. And this is reminding me of a book that I'm supposed to start reading that really centers around this exact same concept, right? That there is fear around being different. There's fear around just saying, listen, I don't, I have to conform to what other people think. And if you don't, then you become the problem. You become labeled as something different and unusual. And so I think that we need to break out of that mold as well. And we need to think carefully about how we are allowing people to define us. Good morning, caller.
Hello, good morning.
Morning, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm well, Sandra. Good morning
Good.
to you. Good morning, Ms. Dukharan. It's nice to see you.
Yes, thank you so much.
We have the opportunity to hear you speak.
Morning.
Good morning, ma'am. Ms. Dukharan, one quick question before I say anything else is, have you seen the documentary, The Spider's Web, Britain's Second Empire?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. And I read a book. Was it the same title? Something about
I
this.
think so.
Yeah.
I wanted to have access to the YouTube documentary. It's almost like a trailer. But the reason I asked that, ma'am, is that, whether we speak on a more Eastern belief system as in karma, or whether we take the more Judeo-Christian belief system, which main tenet is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Mm-hmm. We here in the Cayman Islands, and we broach this subject, we will have to, if we're going to be honest and actually expect to do anything positive, we have to take a very close and objective look at our position within the global system that facilitates injustice across the board. And, we here in Cayman, we celebrate the main pillar of the economy. I'm not going to say it's our economy. Mm-hmm. We celebrate the main pillar of our economy, which is the financial industry. And it is a facilitative and the main beneficiary of global financial injustice, whether we're talking about criminal syndicates, corporate greed, murderous dictators, corrupt politicians of any stripe. Mm-hmm. And it's incredible to me that Cayman can call itself and boast of itself as a Christian country and so on and so forth. Yet still, we are one of the main satellite pawns for the quote the city of London, unquote. And we will have to look at that if we want, even on our own here in the Cayman Islands, and investigate that with honesty. What part of that system we want to be, because we're not going to move forward as long as we remain a main cog in that wheel, as it were. So that is my thought, and I know that I have a tendency to overspeak, so I'll leave it at that. But I'd really like to hear your thoughts, ma'am, on how us, we the Cayman Islands, and the financial industry itself plays into the injustice on a global scale, because we have definitely been a facilitative factor for the suffering of people across the globe. And I would venture to say that by karma, we are now reaping and have reaped some of the very negative consequences of ourselves.
I just want to ask you, though, before you leave, caller, who told you this about you? Who told you this about who you are as a Caymanian and Caymanian people? Who told you this?
Well, with what? You mean our position
that
within the global?
that you are part of a system that cause, as you said, sufferation. Who told you this?
Who told me? I'm trying to understand exactly.
Yeah, how did you come to that opinion of yourself?
And
Myself?
your country?
Yeah.
Because I want to quote for you.
It is bandied about. You mean as a
It is
Christian?
bandied about. It is bandied about. It is a narrative, right?
Exactly.
That we have to think critically about when we hear these narratives. Like I've said many times, when you Google the term tax haven, the images that come up are of tropical island imagery. Okay? Because there is a narrative, and even the algorithm and the AI, worse yet, have adopted this narrative. Let me read for you the top 10 countries on the Financial Secrecy Index. The top 10 facilitators of financial secrecy in the world are: number 1, the United States; number 2, Switzerland; number 3, Singapore; number 4, Hong Kong; number 5, Luxembourg; number 6, Germany; number 7, the Netherlands; number 8, South Korea; number 9, Turkey; and number 10, Japan. So I'm not saying that we are without fault. And our business model may have sometimes caused somebody some hardship somewhere. Let's park that aside. Let's think about how we came to the conclusion that we are taking food out of the mouths of children in the global south. That is not an accurate description of who we are in the Caribbean or SIDS more broadly. Okay, I would like you to really explore where this came from. And it is a narrative that has been spun by the global north, and by the way, by the world's largest providers of financial secrecy.
I would venture to say, that my perspective on this came about from my youth and my observances growing up and watching my country, my home, Cayman Islands, turn from a relatively small country, a small population, and explode. And when I started asking the questions of, okay, so we have overpopulation happening here in Cayman, we have overdevelopment happening here in Cayman. Who is it for? It is largely to house the people who are coming in from across the globe, whether they be the actual operatives within said financial industry or the masses of people who come in to service those people within any given sector of the service industry. Right? And it actually turns around, ironically, that these are the same group of people who will turn around and tell a Cayman that they cannot cut down a tree, that they cannot do this and that when they are sitting on their mansion on the coastline. I also went and I spoke to preachers and I said, listen, if we are going to be a people who survey ourselves as God says, well, then how can we here in the Cayman Islands accept a financial system which allows anonymity, unaccountability when it comes to financial transactions, and be a part of a system which is based upon that unaccountability and that anonymity? Now, I can tell you straight off the bat, Ms. Dukharan, that the only thing that I was subjected to after that was derision by the same said preachers. Because it is a certain truth here in the Cayman Islands that we have allowed and we have given a blight to this system. It is the major pillar of our economy. I wouldn't even call it ours, but it's a major pillar of the economy. And it is tied, I'm sure, Ms. Dukharan, right? I'm sure that your mom has said to you the same way my mom has said to me when we were little children. Two wrongs don't make a right. Okay, so we do have to, if we're going to be truthful and honest and really want to see good forward progress for our people and for the unborn, we have to be honest as to what our part to play is. Because I cannot control what somebody in the city of London or Singapore or Delaware does. I can't. What I can control is my own life. And by extension, the next step possible, or even potentially possible, is to seek to bring a more just equation to my homeland country, ma'am. You see? So I know that I'm not going to change Delaware. I know I'm not going to change Singapore. But the reality is that we here in the Cayman Islands have to take responsibility for our own place. And I would say by extension, the rest of the Caribbean. That's where my perspective comes from, Ms. Dukharan. You know, I respect you so much for your honesty, your way of looking at this, data-driven opinion. But I have answered your question the best way I can, ma'am.
Okay.
I think
I appreciate your answer.
Yes. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So it's about challenging ourselves and asking why do we think this? Why do we think the way that we think? And that's what Miss Marla has just done with Jonathan. Well, where did that come from in your head? Most of us don't have original thoughts in the sense that we've gone and done the research, and our way of thinking is based on sort of objective research that we have done on our own. We're accepting things that we have heard, that we have read, whether those messages come through mass media, whether those messages have been passed down from one generation to the next. That's why you see within families, it's very, very interesting, but most people tend to think alike, right? Because your granny told you this, this, and this. Your granny told you to have these religious beliefs. So therefore, that's what you're going to hold on to passionately. Your granny told you this was history. You know, I've told you guys that my perspective on so many things has changed over the course of my life and been broadened because I have said, wait a minute, the data doesn't support that. Now, how do I know the data doesn't support that? Because I read, I educated myself. That was the only way to get to a different conclusion. So it's like corporal punishment. Caribbean people, time and time again, I've said this, we grew up with this mentality, we beat our children into submission. We don't educate them to have a change of mind. We beat them into submission because that is the easiest way to get someone and to control someone to do what you want them to do, physical violence. And we see it in all of our communities. So even in our homes, when I challenge parents and I say, well, what else could you have done except grab that kid and spank him? Well, he's not listening. Okay. Have you tried talking to him? It's not going to happen overnight. You have to have conversations with children. It has to be a constant. You have to explain things in the way that they're going to understand. They're not little miniature adults. Their perspective on the world is so different. They're learning, they're absorbing so much information. But as an adult, and this is where I really challenge myself, I'm like, if I can't have a conversation with an 8-year-old, my 8-year-old daughter, right? When she keeps asking questions, as adults, we get frustrated. You're asking too many questions. Why do we even say that? That's good that she's curious. That's great that she's asking questions. We get frustrated because we don't know the answers. And we don't know how to handle sometimes being put under a little bit of pressure from an 8-year-old. Can you imagine? So don't tell children, we have this mentality, be seen and not heard. No. We need to rewrite so many of the narratives that we were brought up with. There's no need to beat your children when you can have conversations with them. You can put them in timeout. There's tons of other things, but you see, I'll tell you, when it comes to children, they challenge you because you don't have that experience of dealing with them in any other way. You just know one way of disciplining. And when that, when you really get frustrated, that's what you resort to. And this challenges the core of who we are. I mean, Miss Marla, the way that they got us to submit, slaves to submit, is by beating us. How can that be right for our children? How can we translate that mentality into, well, this is how we raise productive? And I'm always shocked when Caribbeans, people say, well, look at me, I'm perfectly fine. And I look, and I said, well.
I have a joke to give you on that. This one time, I don't remember what was his infraction, but I took away, there was 0 screens, right? Mm-hmm. And after like the second or third day, he's like, Mommy, you can't just give me some licks, please. You can't just give me some licks. I'm dying when there's no screen.
Right.
But yeah, and that's when I knew, I hit you where it hurts. I got
it doesn't last for long. Yes, because the physical, the licks, the physical licks don't last for long,
No,
and he
but
get over that.
but the
Yes,
pain of not having a screen for
was
days
so
is
much more
like,
lasting.
no, yeah. So no, sometimes you can find much better ways of inflicting pain.
Absolutely,
You know.
absolutely. A poor El Rey, he's like, nope, if they can't hear, they're going to feel. Yes, but feeling does not have to be physical, folks, not in the way
No,
that you think.
take away the screen, you'll see.
Yes, oh
Try
my
it.
gosh, of course. So this book that I was thinking of earlier is one
Yes.
that I hope that Miss Aniki Brown is going to be including in her book club, The Courage to Be Disliked. And
I
it's
like
talking
it.
about the Japanese phenomenon that shows you how to change your life and achieve real happiness. Because at some point you can't worry about what other people are going to think about you. And sometimes people downright hate you. Miss Marla, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but you became part of the political landscape at one point in Cayman, where a local politician was referring to you in Parliament. And he made some comment about, oh, you know, these Caribbean economists, we're listening to them and blah blah blah. And I was like, wow. I mean, it's unbelievable that we would listen to someone who does research. Who goes with the facts. I mean, heaven forbid that is who we're listening to. Instead, we should listen to politicians who often don't have a clue. Even if they have a CPA, they supposedly have a degree, they're throwing around numbers that don't make any sense, and it only sounds good to us, and we don't have the ability to dissect and to break apart what they're actually saying because we don't know any better. And that's where knowledge becomes really, really powerful. So, so incredibly interesting. 9362626 is a telephone number. I see somebody else calling me on my personal number. So if you're calling, trying to get on the show, 9362626 is the phone number to do that.
While we're waiting on the call, I just wanted to make one comment. And you talk about education, and of course, education is the way out of poverty, and it's the way, the only way to move to progress, right?
Yeah.
But we have to be careful of the education because, we, I guess, as loyal subjects before we were independent, we were given an education which is about obedience and compliance.
Oh, yes.
And so we have to be sure that we teach the next generation about critical thinking and how to challenge. And that same cover of that book, how to be comfortable with uncomfortable conversations and being disliked, because an education for a developing country should never be about complying with the narratives and the demands of the global north. It really shouldn't be. It should be thinking for yourself, being critical, and thinking critically and independently. And also, one of the things I feel like in the Caribbean, we don't do a good enough job of in education is teaching problem solving. Like I've worked with people who are literally scholarship winners and PhDs. And one problem is thrown at them and they're like, oh, well, I can't find the data for that. I'm like, okay, so then what? The project done? I mean,
yes.
Okay, you can't find the data for that. We have to work around. We have to find a solution. We have to think creatively about how to get around this problem.
Absolutely. Here's a quote from this book that says, "The courage to be disliked unfolds as a dialogue between a philosopher and a young man who, over the course of 5 enriching conversations, realize that each of us is in control of our lives' direction, independence of past traumas, and expectations of others." And it's the same thing for countries. You know, you can apply that same sort of philosophy, if you will, to countries as well. A lot of countries have a lot of past burdens, a lot of expectations. We have been shackled with the history of slavery, and it doesn't disappear. It's still very much impacting our lives today, but we have to find constructive and meaningful ways to address the issues that we are facing. So I do want to play a little snippet of the president's speech. I'll do it like at the end. So hopefully our radio listeners know that they can always go back and watch this on our social media platforms, as well as very, very soon CMR TV. But I wonder if I could do a number of rapid fire questions. So we're going to turn the phone line off again. And I just had some rapid fire questions from the report that I thought was really, really important. So
Okay.
some of them we've kind of touched on already, but here is one that's interesting. Given the fact that the global north is responsible for over 70% of cumulative CO2 emissions, what moral and legal obligations do those of us in the global south, particularly SIDs, have in addressing climate change?
Do we have a moral obligation? I mean, I think not one that's larger than that of the global north. We do have an obligation to be sustainable. And insofar as we are able to use renewable energy, for example, in our development process, why not? But do we have to do that at the expense of debt and putting the future generations of our countries in debt? I disagree with that. I think the moral obligation rests more on the global north. And also, we are a small, even if we were all net zero, it's still only 2%. It's not going to make a big difference. So I feel the obligation is more on them than on us, quite frankly. And a country like Guyana, for example, that's the world's newest oil exporter since 2020, is a net zero country, by the way, because they have so much rainforest. Yes, they capture so much carbon. They're still net zero. So, you know, I feel like it's a narrative and it's a storyline that we're sort of being burdened with, that we should be net zero, we should be, or we're morally obligated, but not more so than the global north. No.
That's interesting. And it's interesting because a large player in the global north is now regressing when it comes to the environment and climate. So yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So next rapid fire question under the headline of tax injustice and economic dependency. In what ways do international tax frameworks designed by former colonial powers perpetuate economic injustice for SIDS and other global South nations?
So I wrote a report about a year ago on towards tax justice, right? And what this report basically, through its the research that I did, what I found was that you have a system where, for example, the global north, or let's say France, colonize a country in Africa that has oil and gas and has other natural resources. And then that country becomes independent. And in the independence process, there is a divvying up of taxing rights. And what this report highlighted was the fact that global north countries, in structuring the international bilateral tax treaty framework, basically gave themselves greater taxing rights than the global south by far, even though the resources sit in the global south. So that system of global tax treaties needs to be renegotiated to make for fairer distribution of taxing rights. And we need to address that very quickly. Under right now, the UN Convention on Tax Negotiations that's taking place at the United Nations, that's one of the agenda items to relook at this global treaty of bilateral tax, global framework of bilateral tax treaties, sorry.
All right, next rapid fire question. Why do you think Caribbean tax systems remain regressive, and what steps can be taken to reform them for greater social justice and economic resilience?
So I think they're regressive partly because we have taken guidance and advice from the global north as to what our taxation system should look like, and it plays directly into what they would like it to look like, as opposed to what works for us. For example, like I highlighted in this report, Barbados and BVI taxing their payrolls, individual payrolls and wages more so than corporate profits. Who are the corporates that are benefiting from those lower taxes on their profits? So we need to not take advice from the global north. We need to look at what works for our countries, and we need to reform our taxation system. Now, why has it not happened? I think we don't have enough brave leaders. Bottom line, full stop. Because it's just easier to tax people's payrolls. It's easier, and it's higher level of compliance in terms of the efficiency of the tax system. But it's wrong, and it's socially unjust, and you're just taxing your people into poverty. And we don't have enough brave leaders who will resist the pressure that they get from the corporates if they change it.
Wow. I'm going to play a video. I'm just quickly grabbing it that I actually saw this morning as I was jumping in the shower that I thought would be important to this when you talk about the taxes. So we'll come back to that in just a second. The question of reparations and quantifying justice, one that whenever we use that word reparations, people are like, no. Even the SIDS and the global South, we're like, no, we can't fix what's already done. Just leave it alone. Should former colonial powers be required to pay reparations for centuries of exploitation? And how can we realistically quantify what is owed, as seen in the case of Haiti? I mean, Haiti is such a sad example.
Sorry. So what I'm suggesting in this report is not reparations in the way that we have been talking about reparations since the discussion began, where we just ask them to repay, because there's all kinds of questions as to who to repay and to what extent. For example, there was a report done, it's called the Brattle Report, Quantification of Reparations for Transatlantic Chattel Slavery, which I cited in my report. Basically, they quantified, but this was just as it relates to the 19 million Africans and their children who were kidnapped and transported to the Americas and the Caribbean, and those born into slavery. And they quantified it at anywhere between US 77 trillion to 108 trillion. And that's for a subset of colonization, right? This is just transatlantic enslavement and those born into slavery. What I'm suggesting in this report is that it is not so much that you owe us, but that our planet cannot survive. All of us, we, not just the global North, not just the global South, all of us cannot survive if the global South is developing in a way that is not sustainable for the planet within the planetary boundaries, as they're called. And we need help financially to be able to develop in a way that is sustainable. And who should pay for that? Not debt, not our next generation in the Caribbean, in other SIDS. It should be those who have polluted already. And so my context in talking about reparations is not as you compensating us, because you could never. Okay, let's just start with that. Even at 108 trillion that they quantified, they said it's an underestimation at the Brattle Report. You could never compensate. And so let's forget about that discussion about compensation, and let's talk about, we all have to live on this planet. How do we create development for us who need to develop in a way that is sustainable? How do we pay for that? And I think that that's a way of reframing, so that one, you don't insult those who have suffered, because you could never fully compensate. But also it reframes it in a way that that is more future focused. Because look, if we keep looking in the rearview mirror, we will crash. Right? We have to look forward, and we have to recognize that we all occupy the same planet, whether North or South, whether SIDS or big countries. And so I want to reframe that discussion of reparation around financing for transilience, basically.
Wow. All right. Let's pause the rapid fire questions. We do have a caller in the line. Good morning, caller. Hello, caller. Oh, let me unmute you. My apologies. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, Annette. You and your guests, how you doing?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad.
Wonderful.
I hear this. Do you think, or does the guest think that we could achieve in Cayman this monumental change that you're talking about without autonomy? Because Cayman is an island nation under another country,
Right.
and to face it and call it as I see it is the capitalistic system that is oppressing and disruption of society.
Mm-hmm.
So sooner or later, I mean, we could take the approach and say, well, they're not really gonna our masters not gonna really let us go ahead and achieve this. But sooner or later, I think the capitalist system gonna get in the way, because they're the half of those same countries that own us are under that capitalistic system, and if they don't make the change, then we would never get a ethnic change or this monumental change in the system to build our better lives unless they allow us to. So in one way, I'm thinking we're gonna have to seek autonomy in Cayman, especially before this could be achieved. Because sooner or later we could say, well, okay, Araman could start the change within itself. Sure. But sooner or later, it's the system. When you're gonna build a society, you gotta build a society one person at a time, and then take on the rest of the country to build a country. And sooner or later, I feel as long as we're under another country as our masters, we will never achieve this, because capitalism gonna get in the way. They're running the world is run under that capitalistic system.
It's a good question. Thank you so much. So can we do this basically if we remain under the UK?
So I only have 8 minutes left, Miss Sandra, but let me see if I can address. I think it depends on. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I don't know what your constitution prescribes, but for example, you have the UN Convention on Tax discussions that I mentioned earlier that's going to relook at how the global taxation framework works, whereas we have the OECD's global minimum tax nonsense, which I'm glad the US pulled out of that because it was just utter nonsense. And the UK is one of the blockers of the UN Tax Convention. It does not want to see this move ahead. Along with many European countries and Japan and Australia, New Zealand. Anyway, the point I'm making is there are certain fora like the United Nations where Cayman does not have representation on its own because you are an overseas territory. So in a situation like this, like the UN Tax Convention negotiations, I would say that not having your autonomy is not working in your favor, because I'm sure Cayman would like to be able to be at the table. This is of an existential nature to your economy, right? The global tax framework. And you don't have a voice at the table. Now, however, there are also downsides to being autonomous. And we don't need to get into all of that, but for example, your credit rating, a big part of where it's because you're an overseas territory. Your fiscal framework, what is it called? The fiscal
FFR.
FFR,
yes.
But yeah, that one, the FFR, you have this framework because you're non-sovereign, because you're an overseas territory. And to be honest with you, I think that's one of the best institutional mechanisms that Cayman has for its economic stability. So I wouldn't want to see that go away. So it's a difficult question. There'll be pros and there'll be cons. But here's what I think. I would imagine that if the people of the Cayman Islands decided collectively by consensus that you wanted a particular development strategy or Transilience reform agenda, and you wanted to take your economy in a certain direction based on certain reforms, etc., and you stuck within this FFR, I would imagine that you would have the freedom to do that. I think you have a certain amount, a fair degree of policy autonomy. My sense is you have a fair degree of policy autonomy in the Cayman Islands. I could be wrong, right? So I would say push with what boundaries exist to come up with your development strategy and embark on a development strategy that you and your people want, and see what kind of a response you get from the UK, but I wouldn't automatically say that you need to be autonomous and independent to pursue a development strategy. I don't think so.
Okay. Fiscal framework of responsibility.
Right. Right.
It always throws
FFR.
me. FFR.
Yes.
It always
Fiscal
throws me
framework.
as well.
We
Yes.
all need one. We all need one.
I know, right? So let me thank Ms. Marla Dukharan for coming on the program today and for breaking down parts of her report. There's so much more in it. Please visit her website. She's got social media channels. Like I said, we're very, very hopeful that she'll become part of, CMR TV. She's going to have these very, very interesting shows where she dissects this information and breaks it down for you. I do think in order for her show to be the most effective, there has to be some interaction with obviously the Cayman community, but she'll have special guests on her show. She has access to all sorts of international experts. And I think that is very, very important to bring home some of these points. So we've only scratched the surface this morning of this report. It's available for free. Please sign up for her newsletter. You can go to the website and subscribe to it, and you'll get this newsletter with all of these amazing reports every single month. And her team works incredibly hard to pull off this very fact-based type of reporting. I do have a comment that I thought was important for you to hear here, Marla. It's from Jim Norris. Jim says, "Thank you, Ms. Marla, for all of your research and knowledge and sharing it with us. I believe you saved Grand Cayman in many ways when it came to the birthing facility. My own personal opinion, but a strong one."
I appreciate the comment. Thank you, Mr.
Interesting. Well, thank you again for spending your morning with us, and we wish you an amazing and wonderful day. And I do have 2 video clips that I'm going to play for our audience this morning. One is from President Trump and what he thinks about taxes, because again, we've got to look at the models that we are following, the models that we believe are accurate and beneficial to our people. And they're not necessarily so at all. They're not even accurate or beneficial to the countries that are employing them, but they'll soon find out, it's just a matter of time. But have a look at this one, folks, which I thought was so incredibly interesting.
And then secondly, would you support a millionaire tax?
I think it would be very disruptive because a lot of the millionaires would leave the country. In the old days, they left states. They go from one state to the other. Now with transportation so quick and so easy, they leave countries. You'll lose a lot of money if you do that. And other countries that have done it have lost a lot of people. They lose their wealthy people. That would be bad because the wealthy people pay the tax.
Wow. That is so rich. He says the wealthy people are the ones who are paying the tax. So don't tax them because they'll leave. But then the wealthy people are the ones who are paying the taxes. It doesn't even make any sense if you just look at that little minute clip there. It's very, very kind of weird, not logic at all. So let me share with you the information here that I was mentioning earlier, this video clip, which is so amazing. And again, this is from the President Ibrahim. Let me try to get that last name again. Hold on. By phonetics. Damien had it written down, I think, for me. Let me just try to see if I can find it again. Traore. I gotta get that right. But listen to some of his speech because, folks, this is next level amazing. Have a listen.
There's a moment in the life of a nation when silence is betrayal, when continued obedience is suicide, and when bowing to the same hands that choke you is no longer diplomacy, it is surrender. My name is Captain Ibrahim Traore. I do not speak with the polish of career diplomats. I do not wear the cologne of multinational boardrooms. I was not trained in Washington nor groomed in Geneva. I speak from the battlefield where my people bleed and the soil remembers. I speak for a nation that has long been treated like a debtor's prison. And today I speak directly to the International Monetary Fund, not with trembling hands, but with a voice rooted in centuries of African pain and now African awakening. For too long, the IMF has posed as a benevolent doctor prescribing economic treatment to sick nations. But what we've learned, what we've suffered, is that your medicine often kills the patient. Your loans arrive with smiles, but they are poisoned arrows wrapped in contracts. You speak of stabilization, but you deliver strangulation. You speak of reform, but what you really mean is obedience to models built in foreign labs never meant for African soil. But we are not your laboratory. We are not your experiments. We are not pawns in your economic chess game. Burkina Faso and the whole of Africa is waking up. And when we wake, we do not ask for permission to breathe. You see, I come not to beg for cancellation. I come not to plead for relief. I come to tell you what no African leader has dared say loudly enough. We no longer accept economic policies that reduce our people to beggars. While our gold lines the vaults of the West, we no longer dance to the rhythm of conditionalities that gut our public services, cripple our farmers, and force our youth into exile. We no longer accept being told that good governance means handing over our national wealth to foreign firms with smiling consultants. So today we begin a new conversation, not one between debtor and lender, but one between equals, between nations, between truth and falsehood. And this is not a press release. This is a reckoning, and it begins now. One, the chains of debt, a modern form of slavery. Let us speak plainly without euphemism, without the polite lies of diplomacy. Debt, the kind you offer Africa, is not a tool of development. It is not a bridge to prosperity. It is a shekel. It is modern slavery dressed in suits and spreadsheets. You call it structural adjustment. We call it structural punishment. You label it financial discipline. We experience it as generational despair. You offer it as partnership. But when one partner profits while the other bleeds, it is not partnership, it is plunder. Let me ask you, how can a nation rich in gold, uranium, cobalt, and fertile land be poor? How can a continent that fuels the industries of the world not afford to feed its own children? We are told it is mismanagement, corruption, incompetence. Yes, Africa has its wounds, but many of those wounds were inflicted by the very hands now offering us Band-Aids soaked in interest. Let me tell you what this debt looks like in real life, not on your PowerPoint slides, but on our streets. It looks like children studying by candlelight because the national power grid was privatized and sold to foreign investors who charge prices our people cannot pay. It looks like hospitals with broken beds, no antibiotics, and mothers dying in childbirth because your conditions demanded we slash public spending to qualify for your help. It looks like millions of African graduates with degrees in hand but no future, job-creating sectors were outsourced, sold off, or collapsed under your imposed liberalization policies. And worst of all, it looks like dignity broken. You see, the repayment plans you create are not economic formulas. They are death sentences. You lend us $500 million and ask for $2 billion in return over decades through interest restructuring fees, currency controls, and privatization clauses that rob us of our national assets. Tell me, what is the moral justification? You say the contracts were signed willingly, but let me ask, is it consent when the patient is bleeding and you are the only one holding medicine with a price tag and a clause? Is it choice when the gun is not pointed at your head but at the starving child behind you? No, Your Excellencies at the IMF, this is not consent. It is economic coercion. This is not development. It is domination. This is not globalization. It is neo-colonialism in financial ropes. And we, the new generation of African leadership, are no longer blind. We are no longer grateful for crumbs from the tables our labor built. We are done applauding policies that hollow out our economies in the name of efficiency. We will no longer trade our sovereignty for loans that disappear into the hands of consultants, only to return as debt for our grandchildren. Let me be even more clear. Africa does not owe you. You owe Africa. You owe us for the gold taken on the colonial boots. You owe us for the minerals that power your smartphones while our villages remain in darkness. You owe us for the diamonds that dazzled your palaces while we bled in silence. And yet, even in all this, we are not asking for charity. We are asking for justice. True justice begins with the end of exploitative debt structures. Justice means allowing African nations to audit what we owe, where it came from, and who truly benefited. Justice means allowing us the dignity to chart our own financial futures, not as clients, but as equals. And if this message feels uncomfortable, then good. Because it is time the comfortable were confronted. To the puppet strings, how the IMF undermines African sovereignty. To speak of sovereignty in Africa today is to speak of a dream deferred, a continent of flags and anthems. Yes, but true freedom, that still hangs in question. They say we are independent, but independence without autonomy is illusion. And few institutions have done more to blur that line between self-rule and subjugation than the International Monetary Fund. You do not govern us, yet you draft our budgets. You do not vote in our elections, yet your approval determines whether our economies collapse or breathe. You claim neutrality, Yet the ink of your influence runs deep in the laws we pass, the leaders we appoint, and the limits of our own ambition. This is not financial aid. This is political engineering. You arrive with briefcases and blueprints, not bombs, but the damage is often the same. Behind your technical language lies a silent weapon, conditionality. It begins politely, cut subsidies, liberalize your markets, devalue your currency. They say just recommendations, but what are recommendations when starvation is the price of refusal? What are suggestions when the next loan, the next breath depends on obedience? Let us not pretend you have become the architects of our internal affairs. We were told structural adjustment would create efficiency. Instead, it created dependency. We were told austerity would eliminate corruption. Instead, it eliminated hope. We were told the free market would lift us. Instead, it lifted our wealth and flew it offshore. And when our people protest, when they rise in anger and hunger and the agony of unmet needs, you do not take responsibility. You step back claiming you are merely observers. But history is watching. Your hands are not clean. From Ghana to Zambia, from Senegal to Kenya, we have seen it play out the same. Leaders forced to privatize water only for foreign companies to raise prices beyond reach. Farmers undercut by cheap imports, they kill local industries. Ministers told to cut spending on schools to balance the budget while foreign debt payments rise. And if we dare to resist, if we question your models or reject your prescriptions, we are blacklisted. Isolate, punished, our credit rating downgraded, our currencies attacked, our leaders vilified in international media as radical, unstable, or populist. But what is more radical than forcing a country to choose between feeding its people and ties, repaying loans it never benefited from? What is more unstable than a society where youth have no future, no jobs, and no faith in politics? Because their nation answers to banks before it answers to its people. Let us be honest. Your influence has too often been a veto on our dreams. You have become unelected governors of African policy. And yet we are not merely victims, we are rising. A new wind is blowing across this continent. We are reclaiming the right to govern ourselves and our languages for our people by our values. We will no longer accept debt that demands we cut essential services before asking the rich to pay taxes. We will no longer tolerate consultants writing our national strategies while our professors go unpaid. We will no longer bow to institutions that answer to shareholders, not citizens. To the IMF, I say this with clarity and calm. We will be sovereign, even if it means rejecting your loans. Even if it means slower growth, but growth that is ours. Even if it means pain for now, but freedom in the long run. Africa does not need masters, it needs partners. And if you cannot walk with us as equals, then step aside. Because we are moving forward, and this time the strings are being cut. 3, a system designed to fail us. We were born into a system we did not build, a global order forged in the fires of empire with the spoils carved into contracts, laws, and institutions that still govern us today. When the colonizers left, they did not leave behind fairness. They left behind frameworks built to extract, not empower. You see, the problem is not just the IMF for food. It is the entire architecture, the rules of trade, finance, credit, and global power that are designed to keep Africa in second place. Designed not by God, not by nature, but by men. Powerful men who decided what value means and who deserves it. Let me ask a simple question. Why is it that we, the continent with 60% of the world's arable land, still import food? Why do we who sit atop gold, diamonds, oil, and lithium need foreign aid?
All right, folks. I just wanted you guys to have it. It is quite long, and I just wanted you guys to have a snippet of this, and you must go and continue to listen. I see some people asking me for the link. I'll happily send that to you, not a problem. But yeah, it's very, I mean, the man speaks no lies there. So wow. Very, very interesting indeed. So please, folks, we're going to go ahead and end the program now. I got lots of work that I got to do, honey chill. And what I can tell you is that 5 o'clock, you can tune back in right here on our social media channel, CMR TV. I see our web guy doing some work in the background here today as well. And you can listen to Sabrina Turner, and I'll be not really co-hosting, just sort of helping her out with the board a little bit. We think we've got the phone lines finally all sorted, so make sure you call in to test them this afternoon. And by the way, I have a new camera. You might have noticed something looks a little bit different today. I do have a new camera that I'm using. So I want you guys to think about, do I look any different today to you? Is it a better look? Is it a clearer look? Do you like it? Do you prefer it? Give me your feedback on what you think. I think it does a better job with my screen here in the back, which unfortunately reflects like the lights. You see the monitors and stuff. So I am going to get some filters for my monitors. I'm going to put those on, some of those blue light filters, because I think once I do that, it will remove the light that is actually reflecting on, because that's a monitor. Somebody said to me, oh, I thought that was a real flag. I'm like, no, that's actually a monitor as well. So we got to stop the monitors, the multiple lights in here reflecting off. So I'm going to work on that. But tell me what you think. Shaka says it looks better look. Yeah. Added a different light over on this side. So if you like it, let me know, and we can certainly keep it, or we can put it back to how it was before. So yes. All right, good folks. The verdict for P. Diddy is in, folks. The verdict is in. We are going to be posting that on our social media channels. It is a mixed verdict. And so what we can say even now is he will avoid a life sentence because they did not find him guilty on the racketeering, which was the most serious charge, and that could have seen him go to jail for life. So it is count 1, racketeering conspiracy, not guilty. Count 2, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, not guilty. Count 3, transportation to engage in prostitution, guilty. Count 4, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, not guilty. Count 5, transportation to engage in prostitution, guilty. He could still be facing up to 10 years for the multiple counts of the prostitution transportation charges. So we'll see what happens at sentencing. But boy, he's lucky, got off on the racketeering, the more serious racketeering charges. He's still facing a lot of individual lawsuits. There are people still, even this past week, who have come forward and are suing him for sexual assault and for rape. Him and his son, I think, were the latest, my apologies, lawsuit that I saw. So what a mess. When this guy has really fallen in the eyes of so many. It's just absolutely sad. My goodness. You can't do wrong forever. That's for sure. Eventually there is most certainly a price to pay. So folks, thank you guys so much. Al likes the camera as well. He says the new camera looks good. What do you say? The eyes don't look like uric. One, they are much smaller. Oh my goodness. Guilty on 2 charges. Yes, the ones related to the transportation. All right, folks, tune in tomorrow morning at 7, this evening at 5 o'clock, tomorrow morning at 7:30. And yeah, we're already rolling right back into another weekend. First weekend of July coming up. Isn't that mad crazy? You guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you this evening at 5 o'clock with Sabrina Turner on Sabrina Speaks.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Cold Hard Truth on Bobo 89.1 FM. Cayman's #1 talk show is live weekdays from 7:30 a.m. Never miss an episode again. Watch anytime on CMR's Facebook and YouTube channels for the latest show episodes. Don't forget to follow us online on our social media channels. And visit CaymanMarlRoad.com for all the latest news and community happenings.